I'm Daniel, a 42-year-old architect with a quiet life in Portland, Oregon. My wife, Emily, is 38, a radiant woman with chestnut hair and a laugh that used to light up rooms. We've been married for 12 years, and I thought we had something solid, unbreakable. I design homes for a living, crafting spaces where people build their futures, and I always imagined ours as one of those sturdy, timeless structures. Emily works as a freelance graphic designer, often hunched over her laptop in our cozy living room, sipping chamomile tea while I sketch blueprints at the kitchen table. We were a team, or so I believed. It started subtly, the cracks in our foundation. About 6 months ago, Emily began staying late at client meetings. She'd come home with a distracted smile, her eyes darting away when I asked about her day. I didn't push it. Trust was our bedrock, and I wasn't about to chip away at it with suspicion. But then there were the phone calls she'd take in the backyard, her voice low and hurried, the kind of tone you don't use with a colleague. I'd watch through the window, pretending to water the plants, my gut twisting into knots I couldn't explain. One evening, I found her sketching something that wasn't a logo or a poster. It was a doodle of a man's face, sharp jawline, intense eyes. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She flinched, crumpled the paper, and said, "Oh, just a random idea for a project." I nodded, but the air felt heavier after that. The next week, I noticed a new scent on her, a musky cologne that wasn't mine. She said it was a sample from a store, but I'd never seen her wear anything like it before. My mind started spinning, piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was a Thursday, and I'd finished a project early, deciding to surprise her with dinner. I called her at 5 p.m., but she didn't pick up. Odd, but not alarming. By 7, still no answer. I drove home, expecting to find her buried in work, but the house was dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Panic crept in, but I told myself she was fine, maybe stuck in traffic. I waited, pacing the living room, until 10 p.m. when headlights finally swept across the windows. She stumbled in, hair mussed, lipstick smudged, claiming she'd been caught up with a client. The lie hung between us like smoke, and I knew. I just didn't want to admit it yet. The next morning, I woke up with a hollow ache in my chest. Emily was already in the shower, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, replaying every moment of the past few months. The late nights, the secretive calls, the cologne. It all pointed to something I couldn't ignore anymore. I needed proof, not just for my sanity, but to confront the betrayal I felt festering inside me. I wasn't a man who acted rashly, but this was different. This was personal. I started small. While she showered, I checked her phone, left carelessly on the counter. The passcode was still our anniversary, 12/12. My hands shook as I scrolled through her texts. There it was, a thread with Jake, a name I'd never heard her mention. "Last night was incredible," he wrote at 11:47 p.m. Her reply, "Can't stop thinking about it. Same time tomorrow." My vision blurred, rage and grief colliding in my skull. I put the phone back, my breathing shallow, and waited for her to emerge. She came out wrapped in a towel, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Morning, Han," she chirped, kissing my forehead. I forced a smile, tasting bile. All day I played the part, asked about her plans, nodded at her vague answers. She said she had another meeting that evening. I didn't argue. Instead, I made a plan. After she left at 6 p.m., I grabbed my keys and followed her. It felt wrong, tailing my own wife like some private eye, but I had to see it for myself. She drove across town to a sleek apartment building I'd never seen. I parked a block away, watching as she stepped out, smoothing her dress, a red one I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary. She disappeared inside. I waited, my heart pounding, until a man opened the door. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that sharp jawline I'd seen in her sketch. "Jake." They embraced, her hands lingering on his chest, and then the door closed. I sat there for an hour, staring at the building, feeling my world collapse brick by brick. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. My mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, hurt, disbelief. But I needed to be sure, to gather every shred of evidence before I let the dam break. I drove home. The image of her in his arms burned into my retinas. Sleep didn't come. I spent the night on the couch, replaying our life together. The vacations, the late-night talks, the promises we'd made. Had it all been a lie? I didn't know who she was anymore, but I knew who I was. A man who wouldn't let this slide. The next day, I called in sick and dug deeper. I logged into our shared cloud account, something I hadn't done in years. There were photos, hundreds of them, synced from her phone. Most were mundane, her designs, our dog, coffee cups. But buried in a folder labeled Inspiration, I found it. Pictures of her and Jake, selfies in a car, laughing. A shot of them at a bar, his arm around her waist. One of her in lingerie I'd never seen, captioned, "For you." The dates stretched back 4 months. 4 months of deception while I'd been planning our future. I printed them out, every damning image, and spread them across the dining table. My hands trembled as I stared at the proof of her betrayal. But I wasn't done. I needed more to understand the depth of it. I remembered she'd linked her laptop to our home printer. I accessed the print history remotely and found a document she'd printed last week. A hotel reservation for next month, 2 names, hers and his. My stomach churned. This wasn't a fling. It was a full-blown affair, planned and deliberate. That evening, she came home late again, breezy as ever. "How was your day?" she asked, pouring herself wine. I wanted to scream, to throw the photos in her face, but I held back. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. She didn't notice. I watched her move through our house. Our life, like nothing had changed, and I realized something. She thought she'd gotten away with it. That was her mistake. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make her feel the weight of what she'd done. For the next week, I played the oblivious husband. I cooked dinners, asked about her work, even suggested a movie night. She bought it, relaxing into the routine, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Meanwhile, I planned. Revenge wasn't just about confrontation. It was about precision, about stripping away everything she'd taken for granted. I started by tracking Jake. A quick search online revealed him as Jacob Tanner, a 35-year-old real estate agent with a flashy Instagram full of suits and smug grins. I saved screenshots, noting every detail. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled guy named Paul who didn't ask too many questions. I gave him the photos, the texts, the hotel reservation. "Follow them," I said. "I want everything." Paul nodded, promising a report in a week. While he worked, I turned to our finances. Emily and I shared accounts, but she had a separate credit card I'd never bothered to check. I logged in and found charges, dinners, lingerie boutiques, a weekend trip to Seattle I'd never heard about. Each transaction was a stab, but I kept going, compiling a timeline of her infidelity. I also started recording her. Small cameras, discreetly placed in the living room and bedroom, captured her late-night calls. "I miss you," she'd whisper into the phone, thinking I was asleep. Daniel's clueless. That one hurt the most, her casual dismissal of me, like I was some fool she could toy with. I saved every clip, building my case. By the time Paul called, I was ready for the next step. His report was thorough: photos of Emily and Jake at restaurants, a park, his apartment. Audio of them laughing in a car. A list of dates and times they'd met, some while I'd been home waiting for her. "They're not careful," Paul said. "Arrogant, even." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the dossier. Arrogance would be their downfall. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to dismantle their lives, piece by piece. With the evidence in hand, I shifted gears. This wasn't about catching them anymore. It was about making them pay. I started with Jake. His real estate business relied on reputation, happy clients, glowing reviews. I created anonymous accounts on every platform he used. Yelp, Google, his own website. I posted detailed reviews, claiming he'd botched deals, flirted with client spouses, even hinted at shady finances. I attached blurry photos from Paul's report, enough to raise eyebrows but not enough to trace back to me. Within days, his ratings tanked, and his Instagram comments filled with questions. Next, I hit his personal life. I found his ex-girlfriend, Mia, on social media, a fiery woman he dated 2 years ago. I messaged her anonymously, sending a few of Jake and Emily's photos. "Thought you'd want to know he's still a snake," I wrote. She responded with a string of furious emojis and a promise to make him regret it. Soon, her posts were full of cryptic jabs at cheating losers, and I saw Jake's name tagged in a few. Good. Let the chaos spread. For Emily, I took a different approach. She loved her career, her independence, her little world of artsy friends. I contacted her biggest client, a boutique firm she'd worked with for years, and posed as a concerned colleague. I sent them an email with screenshots of her texts. Nothing too explicit, just enough to suggest she was unreliable, distracted. "She's been missing deadlines," I lied. They didn't respond, but I knew the seed was planted. Then I canceled her upcoming gigs, using her own email account I'd hacked into with the password she never changed. One by one, her calendar emptied. That night, she came home frazzled. "My client just dropped me," she said, pacing, "and 2 others canceled. I don't get it." I feigned concern, pouring her wine. "That's rough," I said, my voice steady. Inside, I felt a dark satisfaction. She had no idea the real storm was coming. I'd saved the best or worst for last, and when it hit, she'd understand what betrayal really felt like. The unraveling of Emily's world was slow at first, a creeping tide she didn't notice until it was too late. I kept up the charade at home, smiling, asking about her day, offering empty comfort as she ranted about her disappearing clients. "Maybe it's just a rough patch," I'd say, stirring pasta in the kitchen while she scrolled through emails, her brow furrowed. She didn't suspect me, not yet. That was the beauty of it. She'd built her life on lies, and I was using the same stealth to tear it down. Meanwhile, Jake's life was crumbling faster than I'd expected. Mia, his ex, had taken my bait and run with it. She'd posted a public rant on Facebook, tagging him in a tirade about his wandering hands and pathetic lies. His real estate pages were flooded with comments, some from her friends, others from strangers piling on. I watched it unfold from my laptop, a glass of bourbon in hand, as his polished image cracked. A few clients even emailed me anonymously, thanking me for the warnings about him. I hadn't anticipated that bonus. I wasn't done with him, though. Using Paul's report, I found his boss's contact info, a stern woman named Linda who ran the agency he worked for. I sent her an anonymous package, photos of Jake and Emily at a bar, timestamps showing he'd been out during work hours, plus a fake complaint from a client about his unprofessionalism. I didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. 2 days later, Jake posted a vague update about taking time off to refocus. Fired, I assumed. Good. He'd feel the ground shift beneath him, just like I had. At home, Emily grew quieter, her confidence fraying. She'd lost 3 more gigs, and her inbox was a graveyard of polite rejections. I'd been methodical, canceling meetings, sending typo-riddled emails from her account to make her look sloppy. She blamed herself, muttering about burnout over breakfast. I nodded sympathetically, hiding the thrill that surged through me. She'd taken my trust, my love, and thrown it away. Now I was taking her stability, her pride, everything she'd used to justify her betrayal. A week later, I escalated. Emily had a gallery event coming up, a small showcase where she'd planned to network with local artists and rebuild her reputation. I'd heard her talking about it with Jake on one of those late-night calls, her voice bubbly with hope. I couldn't let that happen. I RSVP'd to the event as her, then emailed the organizer from her account. "Sorry, I can't make it. Family emergency." I added a follow-up. "Also, I've been struggling with some personal issues, so my work's not up to par lately." The organizer replied with condolences, but I knew the damage was done. Word would spread. That night, she came home late again, her eyes red. "The gallery canceled my spot," she said, slumping onto the couch. "They said they heard I wasn't reliable." I handed her a glass of water, murmuring, "That's awful." Inside, I felt a cold triumph. She was unraveling, and I was the invisible hand pulling the threads. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Her affair with Jake still thrived, a secret she thought she'd kept safe. It was time to expose it, to turn her world inside out. I started with our friends. Emily and I had a tight circle: Mark and Lisa, our college buddies; Sarah, her yoga partner; Tom, my old coworker. I invited them over for a casual dinner on Saturday, telling Emily it was a surprise to cheer her up. She bought it, even perked up at the idea. While she showered that morning, I prepared. I'd printed more photos from Paul's stash. Emily and Jake kissing in a park, laughing at a cafe, and tucked them into envelopes. I labeled each one with a note. Thought you should know who she really is. When our friends arrived, I played host, pouring wine and chatting about nothing. Emily glowed, grateful for the distraction. After dinner, I excused myself to grab dessert and slipped the envelopes into their coat pockets. They'd find them later, on the drive home, maybe, or unpacking at night. I didn't care when, just that they'd see. By Monday, the whispers would start. She'd feel the eyes, the judgment, and she'd have no idea why. The fallout came faster than I'd planned. Sunday morning, Lisa texted me, "Dan, what's going on? Those pictures? Is this real?" I didn't reply, just let it simmer. By noon, Sarah called Emily, her voice sharp through the phone. I overheard snippets. "How could you?" and "Poor Daniel." Before Emily hung up, pale and trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning ignorance. She stammered something about a misunderstanding, but the cracks were showing. She knew something was off, even if she couldn't pin it on me. That afternoon, Mark stopped by unannounced. He didn't mince words. "I saw the photos, man. I'm so sorry." He clapped my shoulder, assuming I'd sent them in a fit of rage. I played along, nodding grimly. "I'm still processing it," I said. Emily walked in mid-conversation, freezing when she saw Mark's expression. "What photos?" she asked, her voice small. Mark hesitated, then left, muttering about giving us space. She turned to me, eyes wide. "Daniel, what's he talking about?" I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. "No idea. Maybe you should tell me." She didn't push it, but the seed of doubt was there. That night, she barely slept, tossing beside me while I lay still, plotting the next move. Our friends were just the start, her family was next. Emily's parents, Claire and Robert, adored me. I'd been the son they never had. I called Claire the next morning, voice heavy with reluctance, and told her Emily had been distant, secretive. "I found some things," I said, letting her fill in the blanks. "I'm worried about her." Claire promised to talk to her, and by evening, Emily's phone buzzed with a call from her mom. I didn't hear the whole thing, just her defensive "No, that's not true," and the slam of the bedroom door. When she emerged, she looked haunted. "Mom thinks I'm hiding something," she said, staring at me. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Are you?" I asked. She didn't answer, but the guilt in her eyes was enough. With her social circle and family turning against her, Emily's confidence was a ghost of itself. She stopped leaving the house as much, her excuses flimsy. Headaches, fatigue. Jake, though, was still in the picture. I tapped her phone with a cheap app, listening as she whispered to him about needing to lay low. He urged her to meet, promising it'll blow over. I smirked at that. Nothing was blowing over, not on my watch. I decided to hit them where it hurt most, their little fantasy bubble. Using Paul's intel, I found Jake's apartment lease details, month to month, paid through his agency's account. I sent an anonymous tip to his landlord, claiming he'd been subletting illegally, attaching photos of Emily coming and going. A week later, Paul confirmed Jake had been evicted, his stuff dumped on the curb. Emily didn't mention it, but I saw the strain in her face. Another secret she couldn't share. Then I went for their rendezvous spot. They'd been meeting at a boutique hotel downtown, a place she'd raved about in her texts. I called the manager, posing as a concerned husband reporting suspicious activity in their rooms. Vague enough to avoid legal trouble, specific enough to spook them. The next day, Emily got a call from Jake, her voice tight as she listened. "They banned us," she hissed into the phone. "Someone complained." I sipped my coffee, pretending to read the paper, as her world shrank further. By now, she was a mess, jumpy, withdrawn, snapping at me over nothing. "Why's everyone against me?" she muttered one night, pacing the kitchen. I looked up from my sketchpad, calm as ever. "Maybe it's karma," I said. Her head jerked toward me, but she didn't reply. She was starting to sense it, the noose tightening, but she still didn't see my hand on the rope. The final blow was brewing, but I wanted it to be perfect, cruel in its precision, undeniable in its impact. Emily's birthday was in 2 days, a milestone she'd always celebrated with flair. This year, I'd make it unforgettable. I'd kept up the facade, even buying her a gift. A necklace she'd eyed months ago, wrapped in gold paper. She'd think I was clueless right until the end. I planned a party, inviting our remaining friends, her parents, even a few coworkers she hadn't alienated yet. "Let's make it special," I told her, watching her force a smile. She agreed, desperate for normalcy. While she shopped for a dress, I worked. I compiled everything, Paul's photos, her texts, the hotel receipts, into a sleek slideshow. I added audio clips of her calls with Jake, her giggles and whispers layered over images of them together. It was a masterpiece of betrayal, timed to music she loved. The night before, I tested it on our TV, the screen in our living room flickering with her secrets. I burned it onto a USB drive, labeled it Emily's birthday surprise, and hid it in my desk. She came home late that night, reeking of that musky cologne again. "Met a friend," she mumbled. I nodded, letting her lie. Tomorrow she'd have nowhere to hide. The party was set for 7 p.m. I cooked, set the table, greeted guests with a grin. Emily floated around, fragile but trying, unaware of the bomb ticking beneath her feet. As dessert hit the table, I stood. "I made something special for Em," I said, plugging the USB into the TV. The room hushed, eyes on the screen. I pressed play and her world ended. The room went silent as the slideshow began. The first image was innocent enough. A photo of Emily and me from our honeymoon, smiling on a beach. A few guests cooed, but I watched her face, saw the flicker of confusion. Then the music shifted, a slow, haunting melody she'd once called her favorite, and the screen changed. There she was, pressed against Jake in a dimly lit bar, his hand on her waist. A gasp rippled through the room. Emily froze, her fork clattering onto her plate. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the TV as the next slide appeared. Her text to Jake, "Can't stop thinking about it," blown up in bold font. Then a photo of them laughing in his car, followed by her voice, soft and damning, from one of those late-night calls. "Daniel's clueless." Sarah covered her mouth. Mark swore under his breath. Emily's mom, Claire, stood, her face crumpling. "What is this?" she whispered, but no one answered. The slideshow rolled on, hotel receipts, selfies, her in that red dress I'd bought her, all laid bare. Emily lunged for the remote, but I'd hidden it. "Daniel, stop it!" she screamed, her voice breaking. I turned to her then, calm as stone. "Why? It's your birthday surprise." The guests stared, some shifting uncomfortably, others glaring at her. Her dad, Robert, shook his head, muttering, "Disgraceful." The final slide was a photo of them kissing outside his apartment, time-stamped 3 nights ago. The music faded, and the screen went black. Silence hung heavy, suffocating. She bolted from the room, sobbing, and I let her go. Guests mumbled excuses, gathering coats, avoiding my eyes. Claire approached me, tears streaking her face. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," she said, hugging me. I nodded, playing the wounded husband to perfection. Inside, I felt a grim satisfaction. She'd wanted to live a double life. Now everyone knew the real her. The party ended early, the house emptying out, leaving me alone with the wreckage, and her hiding upstairs. Emily didn't come down for hours. I cleaned up, stacking plates, wiping the table where her shame had spilled out. The necklace I'd bought her sat unopened on the counter. A cruel irony now. Around midnight, she crept into the kitchen, eyes swollen, hair a mess. "How could you do that?" she whispered, her voice raw. I set down the sponge and faced her. "How could you?" I shot back, my tone even. She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, the words tumbling out. "Jake was just there, and you were always working, and I felt alone." I laughed, a bitter sound that made her step back. "Alone? I built my life around you." She tried to argue, but I cut her off. "Save it. I know everything for months, hotels, lies. You didn't slip, you chose." Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no defense, and we both knew it. I told her to pack a bag and leave. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, panic creeping in. "Jake's place," I said coldly. "Oh, wait, he's evicted." Her eyes widened. She hadn't known I'd orchestrated that too. I handed her the car keys and walked away, leaving her standing there, broken. She left an hour later, the engine fading into the night. I didn't care where she went. She wasn't my problem anymore. The next day, I filed for divorce. I called a lawyer friend, Greg, who'd owed me a favor since college. "Make it quick," I said, "and make sure she gets nothing." He agreed, citing her infidelity as leverage. I also changed the locks, canceled our joint accounts, and shipped her stuff to her parents' house. Every trace of her gone. The house felt empty, but it was mine again. She'd taken enough. I wasn't giving her another inch. Word spread fast. By Monday, Emily's name was mud in our circles. Friends texted me support, some apologizing for not seeing it sooner. Her coworkers distanced themselves, her reputation as a designer trashed. I heard through Sarah that she'd tried calling Jake, but he'd ghosted her. His own life a mess, his career in ruins. I'd made sure of that. Mia had kept the pressure on, outing him to anyone who'd listen, and his ex-clients were suing him over mishandled deals I'd fabricated. He was done. Emily showed up at the house a week later, begging to talk. I met her on the porch, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming. "I'll end it with him. We can fix this." I stared at her. This woman I'd once loved, now a stranger. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You chose him. Live with it." She pleaded, but I shut the door, her sobs muffled through the wood. Greg called that afternoon. The divorce papers were ready. She'd be served by Friday. I didn't stop there. Her parents, still reeling, cut her off emotionally. Claire told me over coffee that they'd rewritten their will. Emily was out. "Your family, Daniel," she said. "She's not." I thanked her, hiding the smirk. Emily's safety net was gone. Then I sold the story to a local blogger, anonymously, of course. "Cheating wife humiliated at birthday bash," hit the web. Photos blurred but details vivid. It went viral in Portland, her face recognizable to anyone who'd known her. She couldn't hide. By month's end, she was a pariah. No clients, no friends, no family. I heard she'd moved into a cheap motel, scraping by on odd jobs. Jake had left town, chased out by his own scandals. They'd lost everything, each other included. I sat on my couch, sipping bourbon, the house quiet. It wasn't joy I felt, but a cold, steady resolve. They'd betrayed me and I'd buried them. Life moved on, but I didn't let go, not entirely. I rebuilt, focusing on work, sketching homes with a sharper edge now. Clients praised my designs, said they had soul. Maybe they did. I was pouring everything into them. Anger, loss, triumph. The divorce finalized in 6 weeks, Greg delivering as promised. Emily got nothing but her clothes and a car with a lien. I sold our old place, bought a sleek condo downtown, and started fresh. The past lingered, though a shadow I couldn't shake. I kept tabs on her, not out of longing but curiosity. How low could she fall? Paul sent updates. She'd lost the motel room, crashing with a distant cousin who barely tolerated her. She tried freelancing again, But the blog post haunted her. Clients Googled her name and ran. Jake surfaced in Seattle, working some dead-end sales gig, his swagger gone. They hadn't spoken since the fallout, Paul said. Their affair had imploded under the weight of my revenge. And that was the sweetest part. One night, she emailed me. A long, rambling apology, begging for forgiveness. I know I ruined us, she wrote. I hate myself for it. I read it twice, then deleted it. She didn't deserve my pity. I'd given her a life and she'd torched it. Now she'd live with the ashes. I forwarded the email to Greg, just in case she tried contesting the divorce later. She's desperate, he said. Let her drown. The city buzzed around me, oblivious to the war I'd waged. Friends invited me out, set me up on dates. I went, smiled, but kept my distance. Trust was a cracked foundation. I wasn't ready to build on it again. Still, I felt lighter, unburdened. She'd thought I'd crumble. Instead, I'd risen. The cruelty of my revenge wasn't in the act. It was in its permanence. She'd never escape it. A year passed, and Emily faded into a footnote. I'd hear whispers. She'd moved east, maybe, chasing a fresh start no one would give her. Jake vanished too, his name a punchline among Portland's real estate crowd. I didn't care enough to dig deeper. They were ghosts, irrelevant. My life was mine again, sharper, harder, but mine. I turned 43, celebrated with a quiet dinner, Mark, Lisa, a few others who'd stuck by me. No slideshows this time, just laughter and good wine. The condo suited me, minimal, modern, a view of the river cutting through the city. I'd framed one of my sketches on the wall, a house I designed post-divorce. All angles and glass, no soft corners. It was me now, exposed, unyielding. Work thrived. I landed a big contract, a community center, my name in the paper. People called me resilient. I didn't argue. One evening, walking home, I saw a woman who looked like Emily, thinner, hollow-eyed, selling trinkets on a street corner. I paused, heart thudding, but it wasn't her. Just a reminder of what I'd done, what she'd become. I kept walking, the wind cold against my face. Revenge had been a fire, burning hot and fast, and now it was embers, steady, controlled. I didn't need to stoke it anymore. Back home, I poured a drink, stood at the window. The city glittered below, alive and indifferent. I'd lost a wife, a dream, but I'd gained something too, a clarity, a strength. She'd betrayed me in a way I'd never imagined, and I'd answered with a cruelty she'd never forget. Fair? Maybe not, but it was done. I raised my glass to the night, to the man I'd become, and drank deep.